The other afternoon, I was having coffee with a friend who's an essayist. He's the kind of person who reads dense sociology and constantly rails against the superficiality of modern digital culture. He was practically vibrating with intensity, telling me how algorithmic platforms are flattening human consciousness and destroying our capacity for nuance. He called it a tragedy of modern identity. But then he pulled out his laptop to publish his latest piece, and the entire energy shifted. I watched his expression turn from fierce intellectual defiance to pure anxiety. For the next 20 minutes, this same man, who had just spent an hour mocking the need for digital validation, was completely paralyzed, agonizing over a list of hashtags. He was muttering to himself, trying to decide if his work fit better under hashtag philosophy, hashtag contemporary culture, or hashtag critical thought. If I don't pick the right niche, he said, dead serious, the algorithm won't know where to place me, and it'll just disappear beneath the noise. This is a jarring, almost surreal contradiction. Here was a brilliant, deeply complex human being voluntarily trying to squeeze his multi-layered ideas into neat, profitable little boxes just so a machine could categorize him. That instantaneous shift from fierce independent thinker to a compliant data point left me stunned. We like to believe that labels are just harmless tools we use to navigate a crowded digital world. But watching him, it felt like something much more alarming was happening. It made him wonder, what happens when the tools we created to categorize information stop just describing us and start forcing us to change who we are just to fit inside them?
What you were watching in that coffee shop, it wasn't a momentary lapse in your friend's intellectual convictions. And it wasn't just, everyday anxiety about marketing his work. It was a visceral, real-time display of an ontological upheaval.
Wow, ontological upheaval.
Yeah, he was caught in the mechanics of what philosophers, specifically drawing from Heidegger, call the Gestell, or in framing. To really grasp this, we have to look at the overarching logic of the digital age, right? In this framework, everything in the world, human identity, the environment, social relationships, it's all reduced to what is known as standing reserve or best stamp.
Standing reserve, okay.
Right. In this system, existence isn't allowed to just be. It has to be measurable, calculable, and exploitable to possess any recognized value. The platforms we exist on today operate under this relentless, unyielding information processing imperative.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they inherently equate data extraction with truth. So for the system to process your friend, his beautifully complex, contradictory, multi-layered identity, well, it simply doesn't compute. It represents friction. And friction is the absolute enemy of a system designed to process information at scale.
I want to stop you right there for a second, because throwing around terms like, ontological upheaval and standing reserve, it can get incredibly abstract very fast.
Sure, yeah.
If you're listening to this right now and you're trying to map this onto your own life, we really need to ground it. What does standing reserve actually mean in a practical sense? I mean, how is a person agonizing over a hashtag a manifestation of being turned into a reserve?
Forest.
A forest.
Yeah, if you walk through an ancient forest, you experience it as this complex, breathing ecosystem, right? There is an intrinsic value to its chaotic, unpredictable nature. There are shadows, decaying logs, intricate fungal networks.
Right, it just exists.
Exactly. But if a logging corporation looks at that exact same forest, they don't see an ecosystem. They see a timber farm. They see cubic meters of lumber, potential revenue, resource allocation. The forest has been inframed, it's been conceptually transformed into a standing reserve of materials waiting to be extracted and put to use.
Okay.
The digital architecture does the exact same thing to human consciousness. When your friend opens his laptop to interface with the platform, the algorithm doesn't see a father or a friend or a conflicted thinker.
It just sees data.
It sees a standing reserve of engagement data. It looks at his essay and demands to know, what is the utility of this? Which demographic bucket does this fill? How can I extract behavioral surplus from this text to serve targeted advertising?
I see the jump you're making there. But, well, let me push back a little, because isn't that framing overly cynical?
Sure.
Well, if we look at the core function of an algorithm, isn't it essentially operating like a hyper-efficient librarian? Like, if you walk into a massive public library, it is just a chaotic pile of paper without the Dewey Decimal System.
Sure.
A librarian needs to know where a book goes on the shelf, otherwise the right reader will never find it. My friend agonizing over hashtag philosophy versus hashtag contemporary culture, to me that feels like an author just trying to figure out which floor of the library his book belongs on. The hashtag is just the modern Dewey Decimal number.
Right, I hear that.
It routes information.
Yeah.
So why is that an ontological upheaval rather than just basic necessary categorization?
Well, wait, no, let me reframe that. Because that library analogy, that is the exact defense mechanism the tech industry uses to justify its architecture.
Really?
Yes. But the difference between the library and the platform lies entirely in the direction of the power dynamic. A physical library's categorization is fundamentally passive.
Meaning it doesn't change the book.
The Dewey Decimal System does not change the contents of Moby Dick. Melville's text remains completely intact, weird, meandering, full of dense cetology chapters, regardless of what number is slapped on its spine. The book doesn't rewrite itself to fit the shelf, but the algorithm's categorization is aggressively active. It reconfigures the author.
Right, because the author knows the shelf is watching them.
Because the author knows the shelf dictates their survival. In the digital space, the human person is no longer encountered. They are processed. Let's think about physical human encounters. When you stand face-to-face with someone, there is a distinct moral weight, right? Philosophers talk about the ethical summons that comes from encountering another human being with unpredictable depth. A face that demands respect and resists total comprehension.
Yeah, you can't just put a person in a box when they're standing right in front of you.
Exactly. The algorithm takes that ethical summons, strips away all the unpredictable depth, and flattens it into a mere probability sequence. You want a person with a soul or a complex history. You are a data point that is 60% likely to engage with content labeled #critical thought. It's a modern reflection of the ancient Babel narrative, really.
The Tower of Babel, how so?
So in the Babel narrative, the rich, chaotic multiplicity of human expression is forcibly collapsed into a monolingual utilitarian structure just so the tower can be built. The goal of Babel was a single language, a single unified effort to reach the heavens.
The ultimate technocratic project.
Exactly. But it required flattening human diversity into a single operational language. The platforms today are basically building a new Babel. They demand a single unbroken language of engagement metrics. The system leaves absolutely no room for the unpredictable play of everyday practice. It demands that you translate your presence into data. If your friend's essay contains nuance that straddles 5 different disciplines, the machine essentially tells him, I cannot read this. Translate yourself into something smaller or you will not exist here.
Translate yourself into something smaller. That translation process, that forced shrinking of the self, it isn't just an abstract sociological theory, though.
Yeah.
I mean, if you and I sit here and just talk about Heidegger and Babel, we really risk missing how physically visceral this process is for the user.
Well, it's bodily.
Yes. This flattening manifests as a very distinct bodily reality. It happens the exact moment the boundaries we rely on to protect our nuance are forcibly erased by the platforms we use. And I'm thinking of a very specific scenario that plays out over and over again in the digital age. A scenario that perfectly illustrates this collapse of context.
Okay.
Let's say you're listening to this and you think about your own digital life. Imagine sitting in the dim, bluish glow of your monitor late at night. The house is quiet. The only sound is maybe the whir of your laptop fan. You're clicking through a platform you've used for years. Maybe it's a legacy email service or an early social network. For years, you have felt entirely secure in the invisible digital walls you've constructed around yourself. You have a highly specific architecture for your life, right? You've put your work colleagues and your boss in one strict mental box. You have your intimate childhood friends, the ones you share dark humor and personal struggles with, in another box. And then you have your doctors, your therapist, or maybe a support group for a medical condition in a completely different, highly guarded space.
Which, I should add, is the architecture of a normal, healthy, contextualized human life. We survive by compartmentalizing.
Right. It's how we function. But then, without warning, the platform decides to launch a new social integration feature. They want to maximize connectivity. The screen refreshes, a pop-up cheerfully announces a new update, and suddenly you are staring at a completely public, flattened list of connections.
Yeah. The blending.
And right there, side by side, globally visible to each other and to the entire internet, is your boss, the specialist treating you for a chronic illness, and the ex-partner you haven't spoken to in 5 years. They're all just mashed into one homogeneous list. The physical sensation in that moment is immediate and terrifying.
It's a shock to the system.
Your stomach drops into your shoes, your chest tightens. There is this frantic, sweaty panic as your hand grips the mouse and you are clicking wildly through drop-down menus, hunting for a privacy settings or opt-out button that the designers have intentionally buried under layers of inscrutable, grayed-out text. In an instant, your carefully compartmentalized life has just collapsed. The walls are gone.
That panic you're describing, that is the literal physiological response to a violation of what privacy scholars call contextual integrity. And what is so deeply unsettling about that specific scenario is that the designers of the system, the engineers sitting in a boardroom in Silicon Valley, they do not see that collapse as a bug.
They see it as a feature.
They see it as a massive, successful feature. They are operating on a pervasive nothing-to-hide ethos, which is driven entirely by a market logic of transparency and exposure. To the algorithm and the corporate entity monetizing it, the fact that you keep your doctor and your boss separated is seen as a data inefficiency.
A blind spot.
Exactly. It is hitting data that cannot be leveraged for comprehensive profiling. The rigid categorization of the digital space suppresses nuance because it operates completely without respect for contextual boundaries. In the physical world, privacy isn't just about hiding dirty secrets or acting maliciously. Privacy is the active, dynamic process of differential boundary management.
Differential boundary management, meaning, well, the way I talk to you right now is different from the way I talk to my 5-year-old nephew.
Right.
Which is completely different from how I talk to a police officer pulling me over.
Yes, and you present entirely different facets of your identity depending on the context, the audience, and the physical environment. That isn't being fake. That is being a situated human being. But the algorithm demands a single, unified, continuously flowing stream of data.
Because it's easier to process.
Because a flattened, singular identity is infinitely more profitable to analyze, predict, and sell than a fractured, highly contextualized human who changes their behavior based on the room they're in.
Which introduces this vital concept we really need to explore: semantic discontinuity.
Yes, crucial concept.
This is the idea that for a human being to actually flourish, to truly develop an identity, there have to be gaps. There have to be inconsistencies. Researchers sometimes call this interstitial complexity the spaces between the known data points. We absolutely need the space between context.
Ew, we suffocate without it.
If you are listening to us and feeling that exhaustion of constantly being online, it's because when a platform forces totalizing transparency, when it aggressively merges our professional, private, and public data streams into one endless scrolling feed, it destroys the spatial and informational disconnects that we need in order to hold evolving or even contradictory beliefs. We are actively discouraged from expressing nuance because the machine punishes semantic discontinuity.
Right, it penalizes you.
If you try to exist in the gaps, if you refuse to adopt a hardline label, you become invisible to the system. You drop in the feed. The algorithm essentially says, if I can't categorize your discontinuity, I will hide you.
The system utterly abhors the gaps. It views silence, ambiguity, and contradiction as system failures. And we have to recognize the historical lineage of this mindset. Enlightenment, rationalism, and modern technocratic confidence have basically joined forces to convince us that any limit on information processing is somehow fundamentally anti-progress.
Like we're going backward if we don't share everything.
Exactly. The prevailing ideology of the digital era promotes the idea that more individualized information inherently equals more truth. If we just connect everyone, if we just make all data transparent, society will optimize itself. But what that ideology actually creates is a web of seamless opacity.
Seamless opacity, what does that mean?
It means the user is forced to be completely transparent. Your purchases, your location, your political leanings, your social network. But the rules governing the user, the proprietary algorithms sorting that data, they remain entirely hidden in a black box. The platform demands total vulnerability from you while operating in total secrecy itself.
Oh, I hear that, but I have to ask the obvious, glaring question here. If the system is this rigid, this flattening, this invasive, and frankly, this stressful, why do we voluntarily participate? Why do we stay? We aren't physically chained to our routers. Why did my friend agonize over the hashtags in the coffee shop instead of just closing his laptop and saying, you know what, I refuse to play this game. I'm going to print this essay out and staple it to telephone poles. He knew exactly what was happening to him. He literally complained about it for an hour, and he did it anyway.
To understand that paradox, we really have to transition away from computer science and look at the dramaturgical approach to human interaction.
Dramaturgical approach.
Yeah, sociologically speaking, all human interaction, whether offline or online, is a performance constructed to provide specific impressions to an audience. We naturally, instinctively engage in what is called impression management.
Impression management.
Right. Whenever we enter a social situation, a classroom, a first date, a job interview, we establish a front. This front is a standardized vehicle made up of distinct elements: our setting, our appearance, and our mannerisms. The goal of the front is to project an idealized version of ourselves. We inherently want to project a character that aligns with the norms, values, and expectations of our society. And to maintain that idealized character, we engage in mystification.
Let's break down mystification, because it sounds like a magic trick.
Mystification is the deliberate, often subconscious concealment of any aberrant behaviors, thoughts, or flaws that don't fit the socially sanctioned framework we are trying to inhabit.
Give me an example.
Okay. If you want to project the front of a highly competent professional, you mystify or hide the fact that you were crying in your car 10 minutes before the meeting because you felt overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Exactly. The digital world hasn't magically created this desire to perform out of thin air. It has simply hijacked our innate evolutionary drive to manage our front. And it has weaponized it by giving us the tools to perfectly curate that front, 247, to an audience of millions.
But wait, if we are constantly managing a front, if we are constantly hiding our aberrant thoughts to maintain an idealized character, doesn't that imply that all human interaction is fundamentally deceptive?
Yeah.
Are we all just actors on a stage, treating our entire lives like a perpetual customer service interaction where we constantly have to manage our personal brand? Because if you frame it like that, it sounds incredibly cynical. It makes genuine human connection sound like an illusion.
It is a very common reaction to feel that way when you first encounter dramaturgical sociology. It feels cold. But we have to clarify that this performance exists regardless of the mental state or the malicious intent of the individual. Impression management isn't necessarily deliberate deception or lying. It is the fundamental mechanism for establishing social identity and social harmony.
How so?
Consider a doctor who is physically exhausted, dealing with a terrible headache, and emotionally drained. A terrified patient walks into their office. The doctor suppresses their own exhaustion, puts on a calm, authoritative demeanor, and speaks in a reassuring tone. The doctor is maintaining the front of the capable healer to satisfy the social role required by the patient. Is that deception?
No, I mean, you want the doctor to act like that.
Exactly. Or is that an act of social grace and professional duty? We need fronts to make society function. The tragedy of the digital age isn't the mere fact that we are performing. The tragedy, the catastrophic shift, occurs when the audience we are performing for is no longer a human community, but an algorithm.
Because the algorithm lacks empathy. It can't understand why the doctor is tired.
Precisely. It lacks the capacity for hermeneutics, the ability to interpret meaning. The algorithm cannot interpret the true self residing behind the front. It cannot read the subtle, unspoken cues of human spontaneity, the tremor in a voice, or the genuine intention behind a clumsy phrasing. It can only read the rigid, symbolic markers we feed it, the hashtags, the prestige symbols, the emojis, the binary likes and retweets.
Right.
Because the algorithm only rewards engagement based on these crude symbols, the human user effectively becomes a shell for their own data profile. We start prioritizing the performance over the reality in order to appease the platform's metrics. We construct a front that is perfectly optimized for machine consumption. And in doing so, we become alienated from our actual human audience, and far more dangerously, we become alienated from ourselves. We start believing that our curated, flattened front is who we are.
And the toll that takes is immense. Maintaining that idealized front, especially when the algorithm demands total transparency and consistency across all contexts of your life, it requires a staggering amount of hidden psychological labor. It exhausts the user. I want you and I to try and visualize another very common yet entirely invisible moment that perfectly encapsulates this exhaustion. Picture someone sitting alone in their bedroom.
Yeah.
Let's say they're trying to manage what sociologists call a discredited identity online. This is someone whose true thoughts, lived experiences, or nuanced feelings deviate significantly from the incredibly strict, polarized, almost militant consensus of their chosen online community.
The tribal consensus.
Exactly. Now imagine the physical tension in their body. Their shoulders are hunched. Their hands are hovering over the keyboard. They've just spent 10 minutes typing out a genuine, nuanced thought, maybe something that acknowledges a gray area in a heated political debate, or expresses a subtle doubt about a popular movement. It's a real, raw reflection of their intellect.
Right.
But then they pause. They stare at the cursor, blinking at the end of the sentence. They think about the inevitable backlash. They think about the algorithm hiding their post, or worse, boosting it solely for the purpose of outrage engagement. And slowly, deliberately, they hold down the backspace key until the entire genuine thought is completely deleted, letter by letter.
That blinking cursor is the metronome of self-censorship. What you are describing is the literal erasure of the self happening quietly in the sterile glow of a screen in an empty room.
And the process doesn't stop with the deletion. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the algorithm. So instead of their genuine thought, they carefully type out what we might call a disidentifier. They craft a perfectly curated, heavily sanitized, socially sanctioned phrase, a platitude, something designed specifically to help them pass as normal and acceptable within their algorithmic tribe. They hit send. And in the profound, heavy silence of their room that follows, a wave of intense ambivalence and alienation washes over them because they know what they just did. The overt, skin-out assertion they just published to the world completely and utterly contradicts their covert skin-in judgment of what is actually true.
That physical sensation of alienation, that hollow feeling in the chest, that is the direct psychological cost of demanding what we call performative consistency. To really unpack the damage this does, we have to draw a critical philosophical line between two distinct internal actions: the silent act of judging and the overt act of asserting.
Yeah.
Judging is a covert process. It is the internal, private mechanism where we observe the world, gather context, understand something, and affirm its truth to ourselves. It is quiet, it is fast, and it is highly adaptable.
Right.
Asserting, or deciding to act on that judgment, is the overt projection of that thought to the world. In a healthy, well-adjusted human mind functioning in the physical world, there should be a dynamic harmony between the two. But the digital stage demands a relentless, unbroken performative consistency that absolutely refuses to accommodate the messy, evolving, highly situational nature of real internal judgment.
I think a perfect way to illustrate how this internal judgment should work naturally, how adaptable and fast it is in the physical world, is a sensory example of encountering a stray dog. Imagine you're walking down the street at dusk. Suddenly, a stray dog steps out from an alleyway directly into your path and starts barking aggressively. In a fraction of a millisecond, your internal judgment assesses the threat. Your body reacts before your conscious mind even fully processes it. You tense up, your adrenaline spikes, your heart rate elevates, and you make a covert decision to protect yourself. You might even brace yourself to strike the dog if it lunges. That is your initial internal judgment based on the immediate data.
Right, pure self-preservation.
But in the very next millisecond, you look closer. You notice the dog is limping heavily on its back leg. You see its tail is tucked firmly between its legs and its ears are pinned back. The context shifts instantly. It's not an aggressive, dominant animal. It is terrified, injured, and cornered. Instantly, seamlessly, your internal judgment shifts. The threat assessment dissolves and is entirely replaced by empathy. And your overt decision changes before you've even taken a breath. You soften your posture, you drop your hands, you back away slowly to give it space, or maybe you speak gently to it to calm it down.
That is a phenomenal illustration of the beauty of the situated subject. What you're describing is the human mind seamlessly crossing a logical gap. You took contradictory information, a barking dog, which is a threat, and a limping dog, which is a vulnerability, and your internal conscience synthesized it into a nuanced, appropriate moral action. You didn't need to consult a rule book. You relied on contextual intelligence.
But in the digital sphere, you are locked into your previously asserted front. If the encounter with the dog were a digital platform, you would have been forced to pre-register your stance on stray dogs to your algorithmic tribe long before the alleyway. You would have posted your stance, stray dogs are dangerous threats, or conversely, all stray dogs are innocent angels.
Right, you have to pick a team.
When the actual encounter happens, the platform does not allow you to seamlessly shift from defense to empathy based on the limp. If you are part of the stray dogs are threats tribe, and you suddenly post empathy for the limping dog, your tribe attacks you for ideological inconsistency. The platform demands that you maintain the performance of whichever stance gets the most engagement, regardless of the evolving physical reality. You are actively punished for the very adaptability, the very capacity for empathy that makes you human.
And this raises an incredibly profound question about the long-term moral damage this architecture inflicts on the individual. It echoes the Apostle Paul's famous lament in the book of Romans. He said, "For the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do."
Yeah.
That ancient theological frustration has essentially become the daily anthem of the modern digital user. The user is not stupid. The person sitting in their room deleting their genuine thought knows the nuance is missing. They know the algorithm's categories are false binaries. They know the outrage currently dominating their feed is manufactured and devoid of context. But they actively sacrifice their good conscience, which is built on the accumulated residues of past, responsible, nuanced judgments just to maintain the performance.
They surrender their internal moral compass to maintain their social survival on the platform.
And the ultimate cost of that surrender isn't just generalized anxiety or digital fatigue. It is total alienation from one's own internal judgments. If you spend enough time asserting things you do not internally believe just to appease a machine, you eventually stop trusting your own mind. You lose the ability to differentiate between your genuine convictions and your curated performance.
And if we follow that trajectory to its absolute endpoint, if we look at what happens when an entire society operates this way for a decade or more, the consequences are staggering. When the pressure of maintaining this performative front completely overwhelms the individual's conscience, when the gap between the covert judgment and the overt assertion becomes too painful to bear, it leads to what sociologists define as moral inversion.
Yes, moral inversion.
Let's pause on that term, because moral inversion sounds incredibly dark. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel where the villain genuinely believes they are the hero. How does a normal person, just trying to survive online, end up undergoing moral inversion? Is it truly a malicious act, or is it just a tragic defense mechanism?
It begins as a defense mechanism, but it mutates into something far more insidious. Moral inversion is a terrifyingly effective psychological pivot. It occurs when people adopt public symbols, ideologies, or movements that explicitly legitimate the deliberate violation of their own internal moral precepts.
Walk me through how that actually happens.
Imagine a person who inherently believes in kindness and forgiveness. The digital platform they inhabit, however, rewards brutal takedowns, public shaming, and absolute ideological purity. To survive, they start participating in the mob mentality. At first, they feel guilty, the ambivalence is high, but guilt is exhausting.
Right. Nobody wants to feel guilty all the time.
So to resolve the cognitive dissonance, they undergo moral inversion. They convince themselves that the cruelty they are inflicting is not actually cruel, but is in fact a higher form of justice. The truly dark part of this mechanism is that it allows them to enjoy feelings of profound self-righteousness while acting completely hypocritically. They have aligned themselves with the totality of the algorithm.
Because the algorithm tells them they're right.
The algorithm rewards their cruelty with visibility, likes, and validation. Therefore, the cruelty must be good. They no longer measure their goodness by the quiet, internal voice of their conscience. They measure it purely by their metrics. They have fully surrendered their agency to the code.
And when you frame it like that, this conversation crosses the line from sociology and psychology straight into philosophy, maybe even theology. It becomes a literal form of idolatry. Humanity begins to serve the very tools it produced.
Absolutely.
Think about the history of human connection. We take the incredible richness of moral presence, the face-to-face encounter, the ethical summons of being in a physical community, the grace of forgiving a friend who misspoke because you know their heart, and we translate all of that immense, messy humanity into procedural efficiency. We worship the metric. The digital creed that Silicon Valley preaches to us promises absolute autonomy, unparalleled individual expression, and total freedom. But what the architecture actually demands is total subjugation to the system.
Yeah.
We are replacing the historic human pursuit of divine or philosophical transcendence with a kind of computational ascent. We don't want to be human anymore. We want to become the omniscient algorithm ourselves. We want to be perfectly optimized.
And in doing so, as the cultural critic Neil Postman might have warned, we become the tools of our tools. We empty ourselves of our physical, situated presence to achieve perfect digital replication. This isn't just an accident of sloppy software design or a few rogue engineers. It is a fundamental, paradigmatic shift in how we conceive of human flourishing.
It's a complete redesign of what it means to be alive.
Right. If a society equates information processing with truth, if we label any resistance to total transparency, any desire for privacy, or any demand for contextual nuance as irrational, suspicious, or anti-progress, we are willingly walking into a highly articulated prison of rationality. The human being is not a data point to be managed, optimized, and routed to the correct hashtag. A human being requires space, unpredictability, the freedom to contradict themselves, and the capacity for spontaneous play in order to thrive.
So this leaves us with the ultimate question. If you and I, and everyone listening, are trapped in a system that fundamentally equates information with truth and actively punishes the semantic discontinuity we need to survive, how do we dismantle the tower? How do we actually build a system or reclaim a way of living that respects the covert human, the one that desperately needs to live in the unrecorded gaps?
Yeah.
Because simply telling people to delete the apps isn't a realistic sociological solution for a globally connected world.
Right. Outright abstention is a privilege few can afford now. The solution requires a fundamental, aggressive shift in both legal frameworks and technical architecture. First, we must demand and enforce what we can call operational transparency. Currently, we only focus on data privacy, what data they collect.
Right, the cookie banners everywhere.
Exactly. But it is not enough for a platform to simply disclose that they have our data. They must be legally required to show us how that data matters. We need transparency regarding the algorithms, the sorting protocols, the exact granular ways our profiles are being categorized, weighted, and manipulated to shape our behavior. We need to see the gears of the machine, not just the data it eats. But even more crucially, the law must actively protect and enforce semantic discontinuity.
Protecting the gaps, mandating friction.
Exactly that. We must deliberately design technology that is, paradoxically, less efficient at tracking us. We need to legally enforce spatial and informational disconnects within the software itself. A platform should simply not be allowed, on an architectural level, to seamlessly merge your private email contacts with your public social network without introducing robust, context-sensitive, highly visible friction.
So building walls back into the code.
We must build digital architectures that deliberately leave intentional spaces of unrecorded play and unmonitored existence. Spaces where data is routinely dumped, where contexts are separated by thick walls, and where the algorithm goes blind. Because it is only in those unmonitored interstitial spaces, the quiet gaps between the assertions that true subjectivity, creativity, and moral agency can actually form and survive.
We are living in an era where the architecture of our social lives is explicitly, intentionally designed to strip away the protective friction of context, forcing a relentless performative consistency that exhausts our conscience and flattens our humanity. The spaces where we used to experiment, evolve, change our minds without consequence, and simply exist without being processed are rapidly vanishing, replaced by a mandate to constantly assert an optimized version of ourselves.
Ultimately, preserving interstitial complexity is not a technological step backward into the dark ages, but a vital, urgent necessity to allow the situated subject to thrive, ensuring that the boundaries required for genuine human presence remain intact against the totalizing, flattening force of continuous information flow.